Hey, amazing viewers, I love connecting with you all around the world. Stay with me until the end, because what I'm about to share will leave you inspired and ready to take control of your own life. In today's story, you'll hear about an incredible twist that no one saw coming. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. It was just another evening in the city, one of those ordinary nights when the sun dips low, painting the sky with amber and gold, and the streets of Sacramento seem to slow down for a moment, like everything's holding its breath. But for Eric Porter, this evening would be anything but ordinary. He had spent the day in meetings, his mind working through endless numbers and strategic plans. All he wanted now was to get home, kick back, and forget about the grind. Little did he know that a simple traffic stop was about to turn into a life-altering experience, one that would shake the foundations of everything he believed about fairness, respect, and what it means to truly know someone. As he cruised along the street in his sedan, the radio humming softly in the background, the faint scent of fresh air from the slightly cracked window mingled with the faint stress of the day's work. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't even thinking about what was ahead. But in an instant, the world around him changed. The sharp flash of red and blue lights reflected in his rearview mirror, and a siren sliced through the calm air. His pulse quickened as he eased his car over to the side, the sudden tension thickening the air around him. What now? He thought, his mind racing. He had been careful, always obeying the rules. But today, fate had a different plan. The officer who approached his car was young, no more than 30, with a buzz cut and an air of quiet authority. His uniform gleamed under the streetlights, but his attitude spoke louder than his appearance. Officer Bradley Larson seemed confident, almost cocky, as he strode toward Eric's vehicle. He didn't smile, didn't say anything before issuing a curt command. "License and registration," he said flatly, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied Eric's every move. Eric complied immediately, reaching for the papers without hesitation, his movements calm. But even as he handed them over, he could feel the officer's gaze, sharp and unrelenting, digging into him. It wasn't just a traffic stop anymore. Something about the way Larson looked at him, something about his posture, told Eric that the officer was already making assumptions that had nothing to do with a red light. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Larson asked, his tone flat, as though he had already made up his mind about what was going on. Eric blinked, a subtle frown forming. "Not entirely sure, officer," he replied, his voice steady but polite. "I thought I slowed down in time." Larson didn't answer right away. Instead, his eyes studied Eric more closely, a flicker of doubt crossing his face for a moment. "You didn't come to a full stop," he said, almost dismissively. Eric nodded, though he wasn't entirely convinced. But the words from the officer didn't match the calmness in his own chest. There was something else going on here, something Eric couldn't quite put his finger on. But as Larson lingered by the window, the air grew heavier, the tension palpable. His questions were becoming sharper, his attitude subtly shifting. Eric, with his calm demeanor, could feel the officer's suspicion building. This wasn't just about a minor infraction anymore. This was about something deeper. But Eric didn't flinch. Larson wasn't done. He wasn't just going to accept this for what it was. He was looking for more. And as Eric's mind raced, he realized one important thing. This wasn't just about a routine traffic stop. It was about to become something much bigger. Something that would challenge everything Larson thought he knew about power, control, and respect. As Larson's eyes narrowed, the question hung in the air. Where are you headed in such a hurry? The moment had arrived. And Eric knew, deep down, this would be a defining moment, one that would change not just his night, but the rest of his life. And maybe, just maybe, the officer's life as well. A game of control, power, and truth. The street was silent now, save for the hum of the occasional car passing in the distance. Officer Larson stood by Eric's window, his presence looming larger than it should have been for a routine traffic stop. The red and blue lights reflected off the polished chrome of the sit-in, casting strange shadows across their faces. The evening air seemed to crackle with tension, like the calm before a storm. Eric could feel it. The moment was slipping into something more than just an inconvenience. It was as if Larson, with his quiet authority, was searching for something that wasn't there. The traffic stop had turned into a test, but Eric wasn't sure what was being tested: his patience, his composure, or something deeper, something far more insidious. The officer's questions had shifted, become more pointed. The small talk was gone, replaced by a quiet, unspoken challenge that Eric could sense from the officer's every movement. Larson leaned in a little closer, eyes narrowing, as if trying to decipher something about Eric he couldn't quite figure out. "Where are you headed exactly?" he asked again, but this time there was an edge to his voice, a hint of something else, something more. "Just going home," Eric answered, his voice unwavering, steady. The words should have been enough. Simple, unremarkable. But Larson didn't seem satisfied. He lingered there, peering into the car like a predator looking for a flaw in its prey. Eric's calmness only seemed to fuel the officer's growing suspicion. The longer Larson stared, the more Eric felt the weight of the officer's assumptions that had nothing to do with his driving or the supposed violation. Larson wasn't looking at Eric anymore. He was looking at what Eric represented in his mind. "You don't look like you're from around here," Larson remarked, his voice suddenly colder, more dismissive. Eric paused for a brief moment, but not enough to show any hesitation. "I moved here a few months ago," he replied, his hand reaching for the documents as he tried to keep the situation calm. But Larson wasn't listening. The officer's gaze had shifted now, less interested in the mundane details of Eric's life and more invested in something intangible, his own misjudgments, the ones he had already started to form in his mind. The questions grew sharper, the scrutiny more intense. Eric could feel the shift in the officer's body language, the subtle signs of doubt and suspicion that were slowly morphing into something else. "Where's the rush?" Larson asked, his tone turning accusatory, more demanding than before. The implication was clear. Eric was somehow guilty of something bigger than a simple stop. The officer seemed to think Eric's calm demeanor was a cover-up for something more sinister. But Eric didn't flinch. "No rush, officer," Eric replied calmly, his voice never wavering. But even as he spoke, something inside him was starting to churn, an unsettling feeling growing in his gut. He had been in enough high-stress situations to know when things weren't right. This wasn't about a simple traffic violation. It wasn't even about the paperwork. No, it was something deeper, something that had nothing to do with the law. Larson's gaze shifted from Eric's face to his car, as if searching for a reason to escalate. Eric stood there, composed, silent, his hand steady at his sides, waiting. He knew what was coming next. The officer's next words would be the deciding factor, the moment when things would either calm down or when they would spiral into something neither of them could predict. And then, the inevitable came. "Step out of the car," Larson ordered, his voice now colder, with an unmistakable command behind it. Eric's heart didn't race. He didn't panic. Instead, he took a deep breath and calmly opened the door. "Is there a reason you need me to step out, officer?" he asked, his voice measured, without defiance, but with clarity. Larson didn't answer immediately. Instead, he seemed to hesitate for just a second before repeating his command, this time with more force, as if his power were slipping away. Eric knew he was being tested, but he wasn't about to play into it. As he stepped out of the car, Eric's posture was calm, relaxed even, but beneath the surface, there was a quiet resolve building. The officer's assumptions were about to face the reality of who Eric really was, and Larson, though unaware, was about to learn the hard way. The encounter, which started as a simple traffic stop, was now a collision course between two very different worlds, one where assumptions and biases reigned, and another where truth, respect, and composure would take center stage. And Eric Porter, despite everything that was building around him, was about to turn this night into a powerful lesson in accountability. The game of control was on, and Eric was ready to play. The power of respect and accountability. As Eric stepped away from his car, the air seemed to thicken, every breath he took feeling heavier than the last. Larson, standing in front of him, had no idea what was about to unfold. He was still gripping the illusion of control, convinced that the man in front of him, the one with the calm expression and tailored suit, was someone he could intimidate, manipulate. But Eric knew something that Larson did not. Real power doesn't come from threats or domination. It comes from respect, understanding, and self-awareness. "Turn around and place your hands on the hood," Larson commanded, his voice sharp, trying to reassert his authority. "I need to check for weapons." Eric didn't flinch. He didn't get defensive. Instead, he stood tall, his gaze steady, his voice calm but unwavering. "Weapons?" Eric repeated, raising an eyebrow, his tone more surprised than anything. "Do I look like someone who's carrying a weapon, officer?" The words hung in the air, a challenge, a question that only Larson could answer. Eric wasn't backing down, but he wasn't angry either. He wasn't defensive, and he wasn't hostile. He simply stood his ground, calmly and with quiet dignity, waiting for Larson to reconsider. Larson's frustration boiled over. He was used to people being afraid, to cowering under the weight of his uniform. But Eric wasn't like everyone else, and the officer, for the first time, was unsure of how to handle the situation. He stepped closer, trying to invade Eric's space, trying to provoke a reaction, any reaction. But Eric remained unfazed, unwavering. "Do I look like someone who needs to be treated this way?" Eric asked, his voice even. It wasn't defiance, it wasn't aggression, it was clarity. He wasn't playing Larson's game. He wasn't the one being tested. Larson was. With a barely perceptible sigh, Larson began patting Eric down, trying to maintain control, trying to feel like he was still in charge of the situation. But it was clear to both of them. This wasn't about a search. It wasn't about the law. It was about something deeper. Larson was trying to assert dominance over Eric, but in doing so, he had forgotten one fundamental truth. Respect is earned, not forced. When the search ended, and Larson muttered something about Eric being clean, Eric stepped forward, his movements deliberate. He didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to make a scene. He simply spoke the truth, and it was more powerful than anything Larson had tried to do. "Officer, let me make something clear," Eric said, his voice calm but firm. "The problem isn't with the profiling or the escalation of the situation. The problem is that you assumed I wouldn't know my rights. You assumed that because I didn't fit your idea of someone deserving respect, that I wouldn't stand up for myself." For the first time, Larson faltered. His confident demeanor, the one that had carried him through so many situations before, was crumbling before him. Eric wasn't just talking to him about the law. He was talking about something more profound, about how easily people can make judgments based on their own biases, and how those biases can distort reality. "You assume that I don't know who I am, that I don't understand the power dynamics at play." Eric continued, his words piercing the air. "But the truth is, Officer Larson, it's not about who I am. It's about who you are. And in this moment, you've forgotten that the badge you wear comes with a responsibility to serve with integrity, fairness, and respect." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. And for a moment, Larson stood there, speechless. Eric wasn't just educating him about the law. He was holding up a mirror, showing Larson the ugliness of his assumptions, forcing him to see the danger of the power imbalance he had created in his own mind. "You know what the most troubling part of this interaction has been, officer?" Eric asked, his voice softer but no less powerful. "It's that you didn't even realize who you were talking to. You didn't know that I'm the head of internal affairs, that my job is to ensure officers uphold the integrity they swore to protect. That's the real issue here." Eric pulled out his badge, slowly, deliberately, and handed it to Larson. There was no anger in his eyes, no bitterness. There was just quiet authority, the kind that comes from knowing who you are and standing firm in that knowledge. Internal affairs, Larson repeated, his voice faltering as the weight of the truth sank in. But Eric didn't stop there. And that's not just a problem for me, he continued. That's a problem for every person you interact with, for every officer who wears that badge. If we can't trust each other, if we can't treat each other with respect, then what are we doing here? In that moment, Larson's confidence shattered. His authority, which had seemed so certain moments before, unraveled before him. The most powerful lesson had been delivered, not through force or anger, but through the quiet strength of truth and respect. And in that silence, Larson realized something profound. Real power doesn't come from domination. It comes from accountability. The truth is, respect isn't given based on appearance, position, or assumptions. It's earned through integrity, fairness, and the willingness to see each other for who we truly are. And when we forget that, we risk losing the very foundation of trust that holds us all together. As Eric turned to walk away, leaving Larson to process the weight of his words, the powerful message was clear. It's not the badge or the uniform that defines a person. It's the character they bring to the job and the respect they show to others. That's the true test of integrity. And that's the lesson Larson would carry with him from that moment forward.